My foster mother's hands were shaking so badly she couldn't hold the teacup, and that's when I noticed the box in her closet with my name written on it in handwriting that wasn't hers. I was 34 years old, standing in the house I grew up in, helping Carol Whitfield pack for assisted living after her stroke. The doctors said she'd recover most of her speech. They didn't say anything about what she'd choose to keep quiet on purpose. "That's nothing," Carol said when she saw me looking at the shoebox tucked behind her winter coats. "Old paperwork, throw it out." I almost did. God, I almost did. But something about the way her eyes followed my hands as I lifted the lid made me stop. Inside were envelopes, dozens of them, yellowed at the edges, some so old the ink had faded to a ghost of itself. Every single one was addressed to me. Marin Ellis, care of Jean and Carol Whitfield, 214 Larkspur Lane. The return address on the top envelope read, Diane Cole. My biological mother's name. I'd been told my whole life that Diane Cole gave me up because she didn't want me, that she signed the papers and disappeared, that she never once looked back. I sat down on the edge of Carol's bed, my legs suddenly unreliable, and I opened the first letter. It was dated 3 months after I'd been placed in foster care. I was 4 years old. "My sweet girl," it began, "I think about you every single day. I am fighting so hard to get you back. Please don't ever think I stopped loving you." I looked up at Carol. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "How many of these are there?" I asked her, and my voice came out flatter than I expected, because the shaking part of me hadn't caught up yet with what my hands already knew. "Marin, honey, it's complicated." "How many, Carol?" She stared at her lap. "All of them. Every letter she ever sent." I counted them that night, sitting alone on my kitchen floor with a glass of wine I never touched. 61 letters, spanning 22 years. The last one was postmarked 4 years ago, right around the time I got married. Diane hadn't known. She hadn't been invited. She hadn't even known if I was alive. I want to tell you that I confronted Carol right then, that I stormed back into that assisted living facility and demanded answers. But grief doesn't work like television. I drove home. I called my husband Paul, and I couldn't even get the words out clearly enough for him to understand what happened, and he just held the phone to my ear while I cried until I couldn't anymore. The next morning I read every letter in order. They told a story I never knew I was living inside of. Diane hadn't abandoned me. She'd fled a violent marriage when I was 3, taken me with her, and eventually lost custody in a system that, back in the 90s, didn't ask enough questions about who the actual danger was. A judge placed me in temporary foster care while she stabilized her situation, which meant getting a restraining order against my biological father, finding steady work, and proving to a caseworker that she was fit. She did all of it. She wrote it all down for me, year after year, waiting for the day the letters would finally reach me. They never did. Instead, 18 months into my placement, Carol and Jean Whitfield filed to adopt me permanently, citing Diane's lack of consistent contact as evidence of abandonment. The lack of contact that Carol herself had manufactured by keeping every letter, every photo, every birthday card in a shoebox in her closet. I called the family court records office 2 days later. It took 3 weeks and a lawyer named Renata Suarez, who specialized in adoption fraud, to get the actual case file. Renata was in her 50s, sharp-eyed, with the kind of patience that made you feel like she'd heard everything before, and nothing surprised her anymore. "This is going to be hard to hear," she told me, sliding a folder across her desk, "but you need to see it." Inside was a caseworker's note from 1996. Diane Cole appears stable, employed, and has completed all requirements for reunification. Foster placement recommends extended evaluation period. The foster placement was Carol. "She stalled it," Renata said. "Every time your mother got close to getting you back, there's a new note in here requesting more time, more evaluations, more documentation, and look at this." She pointed to a line item buried in a financial disclosure form from 1998. "Trust established by Eleanor Cole, maternal grandmother for benefit of minor child, to be administered by legal guardian until age 18. Initial deposit, $86,000. My grandmother, a woman I'd never known, had left me money. Money that was supposed to go toward my education, my future, my life. Money that had been placed under the legal control of whoever held custody of me. Carol never adopted me out of love. She adopted me because as long as I stayed in her house, she controlled that trust. I need to know if she spent it, I said. Renata's mouth tightened. That's the next thing we find out. It took 2 months to subpoena the financial records. Carol fought it, of course, hiring her own attorney, insisting this was a private family matter, and I was, in her words, digging up ancient history to hurt an old woman. But paper doesn't lie the way people do. The trust that should have grown to well over $200,000 by the time I turned 18 had a balance of $4,000. Withdrawals littered the statements, a down payment on a lake house in 2003, private school tuition for Carol and Jean's biological daughter, my foster sister Priya, in 2005, a kitchen renovation in 2009. My name was on every withdrawal slip as the beneficiary. My signature was on none of them. She forged your signature as a minor using her guardian authority, Renata explained, which was legal in small amounts for actual expenses on your behalf. It is not legal for a lake house. I drove to the assisted living facility that same afternoon. I hadn't planned to. I just needed to look at her. Carol was sitting by the window, a blanket over her knees, looking smaller than I remembered her being just months earlier. For a moment, watching her, I felt the old reflex kick in, the instinct to be gentle with her, to protect her feelings the way I'd been trained to since I was a child in her house. Then I remembered 61 letters in a shoebox. "Did you love me?" I asked her, "or did you love what I came with?" Her eyes filled. "Marin, I raised you. I fed you. I sat with you every night you had nightmares about your father. Don't you dare stand there and act like none of that mattered." "It mattered," I said. "That's what makes this so much worse. You could have loved me and told the truth. You chose to love me and lie." "Your mother wasn't ready for you," Carol said, and her voice cracked on the word mother like it cost her something to say it. "I made a judgment call." "You made a financial call," I said. "I've seen the withdrawal slips, Carol. I know about the lake house." She went very still. "Priya's private school," I continued. "Your kitchen. All of it. Out of a trust my grandmother left for me. While you told the judge my mother wasn't consistent enough to get me back because you were the one hiding her letters." "I was protecting you," Carol whispered. "You were protecting 61 letters worth of money," I said. "Don't call it protection. Call it what it was." I left before she could answer. I don't remember driving home. That night, Renata helped me draft something I never imagined writing, a probate court petition for breach of fiduciary duty, alongside a formal request to the state's Department of Children and Families to review the original custody case for evidence of caseworker misconduct enabled by false reporting. I want to be honest with you. Part of me wanted to destroy her, wanted to see her humiliated the way I felt humiliated finding out my entire childhood had been narrated to me by someone with a financial stake in the story. But Renata kept saying the same thing to me over and over in every meeting. The law doesn't care how satisfying it feels. It cares what you can prove, so we're going to prove all of it quietly and let the outcome speak for itself. While the legal case moved forward, I did something I'd been too afraid to do for weeks. I found Diane Cole. She wasn't hard to find, actually. She'd lived in the same small city 90 minutes away for over a decade, working as a hospital billing coordinator, remarried, no other children. Renata suggested I write a letter before calling, so the shock wouldn't be too sudden for either of us. I wrote 4 drafts before I settled on the 5th. "My name is Marin Ellis. I recently learned that you wrote to me for over 20 years, and that those letters were kept from me. I read every one. I would like to meet you, if you're willing." 2 days later, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. "Marin?" The voice was unsteady, older than I expected, thick with something between disbelief and terror. "Is this really you?" I sat down hard on my kitchen floor for the second time in a month. It's me. I have looked for you every year, Diane said. Every single year on your birthday, I called that agency and they told me there was no update. I thought maybe you hated me. I thought maybe you were told I never wanted you. I was told exactly that, I said, and we both cried on the phone for a long time before either of us said another word. We met in person 3 weeks later at a diner exactly halfway between our two cities, a location Diane had picked because, she admitted, she needed somewhere with an exit close to the door in case she panicked and needed to leave. She didn't need to leave. We sat across from each other for 4 hours. She brought photographs I'd never seen, me as a baby, me on my 3rd birthday, taken just months before the state took me from her arms. She brought copies of court filings she'd kept for 20 years, proving every reunification requirement she'd completed, filed away like evidence she always suspected she might need someday. I never stopped believing you'd find these letters eventually, she told me. I kept sending them even after the agency stopped forwarding my address updates because I thought, someday, somebody is going to hand her a box and she's going to know I never left. I know now, I said. I know. The probate case took another 5 months. Carol's attorney tried to argue that the withdrawals were reasonable guardian expenses, that a lake house counted as a family asset that indirectly benefited me, that the private school tuition was defensible because I occasionally used Priya's tutoring materials. Renata dismantled every claim with bank statements, tax records, and a forensic accountant who testified that of the original $86,000 trust, adjusted for 2 decades of growth it should have accumulated, Carol had misappropriated an amount just north of $240,000. The judge did not need long to decide. Carol was ordered to repay restitution from her own assets, including a lien against the very lake house the trust had funded. The Department of Children and Families opened a formal review into the original caseworker's conduct, and while that caseworker had long since retired, the review became part of a broader state audit into reunification delays tied to guardians with financial incentive to prolong placements. Renata told me 2 other families came forward during that audit with strikingly similar stories. I didn't ask for Carol to go to prison. I could have pushed for fraud charges. Renata told me I had enough for it. But sitting across from Diane one evening, going through the last of the letters together, I realized what I actually wanted wasn't to watch Carol suffer. I wanted my mother back, in whatever years we had left to build something out of the wreckage of the years we lost. I saw Carol one final time, after the restitution order was finalized. She'd been moved to a smaller room in the facility, the lake house sold to satisfy the lien. She looked at me when I walked in, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see the woman who raised me. I saw a stranger who had made a devastating choice and lived long enough to watch it cost her everything she'd built on top of it. "I hope you're happy," she said, and there was no venom in it, just exhaustion. "I'm getting there," I told her. "It's not because of what happened to you. It's despite it." I walked out of that room and I didn't look back, and for once that phrase didn't feel like something borrowed from a movie. It felt like the truest thing I'd said in months. Diane came to my house for dinner 2 weeks later. Paul made his terrible attempt at lasagna, and Diane laughed so hard at how burnt the edges were that she nearly choked. And I sat there at my own kitchen table watching my mother meet my husband for the first time at 34 years old. And I thought about the 4-year-old girl who used to fall asleep wondering why nobody wanted her. Somebody had wanted her every single day. The letters had just never made it home. I framed one of them, the very first one Diane ever wrote, the one that started with "My sweet girl," and I hung it in my hallway where I see it every morning. Not because I need to relive the anger. That part of me has quieted down more than I thought it ever could. I hung it there because it's proof. Because for 22 years, someone loved me on paper across an unbridgeable distance, and eventually, the distance closed anyway. Carol didn't get to write the ending to my story, even though she spent 2 decades trying. My mother did. It just took a little longer to arrive than it should have. And honestly, some mornings, standing in that hallway with my coffee, looking at that letter in a stranger's handwriting that turned out to be the handwriting of the person who loved me the longest. I think that ending was worth every year it took to find.